Caroline Mitchell collapsed to her knees on the wet concrete, clutching her 2-day-old son against her chest. Blood seeped through her hospital gown where her C-section stitches had torn. Behind her, the door slammed shut. Her husband's voice echoed through the wood. "Don't come back!" She had begged. She had crawled. She had offered him everything. He threw $500 at her face and called her garbage. What Derek Harrison didn't know, what no one knew, was that 3 hours ago, Caroline had inherited a billion-dollar empire. And in 24 hours, she wouldn't just be his ex-wife. She would be his boss. Subscribe now and watch until the end to see how this broken woman destroys the man who threw her away. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain in Seattle didn't fall. It attacked. Caroline gripped the car seat handle until her knuckles turned white. Every step sent fire through her abdomen. The stitches were pulling. She could feel something warm and wet spreading beneath the hospital gown she still wore under her coat. "Todd," she called out, pushing through the front door. "Derek, we're home. Jamie slept the whole way." Silence. The living room looked wrong. Too clean, too organized. The pile of mail that always cluttered the console table was gone. The throw blankets were folded with military precision. Then she saw the suitcases. 3 large black suitcases stood by the door, like soldiers waiting for orders. Caroline's heart stopped. Derek. He was sitting in his leather recliner, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the blank television screen, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. He wore his good suit. The Navy Brooks Brothers he saved for important presentations at Wellington Logistics. "Are we going somewhere?" Caroline whispered. A cold flush crept up her neck. "Derek, what's happening?" He finally turned. His face was a mask. Smooth. Indifferent. It was more terrifying than anger. "No, Caroline." His voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. "We aren't going anywhere. You are." Caroline blinked. She looked down at Jamie sleeping in the car seat, then back at her husband of 3 years. "I don't understand. Is this a joke? I just had surgery? I can barely walk." "It's not a joke," a female voice said. Caroline froze. The kitchen door swung open. A woman walked out. Brittany Collins, the 22-year-old intern from Derek's office. The one who always laughed too loud at his jokes during company parties. She was wearing Caroline's cashmere robe, the one Caroline had received as a wedding gift from her mother. Brittany leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. She looked at Caroline with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Derek." Caroline's voice cracked. "What is she doing here? She lives here now." Derek stood up. He walked over to Brittany. He didn't touch her. He just stood beside her, presenting a united front. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you," he said. "But there's never a right time. I'm not happy, Caroline. I haven't been happy for a long time." "You're leaving me!" Caroline gasped. Her grip on the car seat tightened until her hands ached. "Now I just gave birth to your son. 2 days ago. 2 days, Derek." "That's exactly why." His calm facade cracked, just for a second. Annoyance flashed across his face. "Look at you, Caroline. You're a mess. Sweatpants, spit up on your shoulder. You have no ambition. You're content living paycheck to paycheck, clipping coupons like your mother did. I'm rising at Wellington. I'm about to become VP. I need a partner who fits that image, someone who looks like she belongs at a country club." He glanced at Brittany. "Not a Walmart." Caroline felt the words hit her like physical blows. "I supported you," she whispered. "I worked double shifts at the diner so you could finish your MBA. I paid the bills while you studied. I gave up my scholarship so you could chase your dreams. And now that you have a little success, I'm not good enough." "You were never good enough." Derek checked his watch. "This isn't a debate. I've paid the rent through the end of the month, but the landlord knows the lease transfers to my name tomorrow. You need to leave, now." "It's pouring rain. Not my problem." I have nowhere to go. My mother is dead. I have a newborn baby. Your son, Derek." Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced at the car seat, his expression hardening. "I'll send you a check for child support once the lawyers draft the papers. But right now, I can't have a crying baby here. I have a meeting with the regional director in the morning. I need sleep." He walked to the nearest suitcase. Caroline's suitcase. He dragged it to the front door and threw it open. The wind howled. Rain sprayed into the hallway. "Derek, please?" Caroline dropped to her knees. Pain exploded through her abdomen. She felt something tear. Felt the warmth of blood soaking through the bandage. "Just let me stay in the guest room. 1 week, just until I can find a place. Don't do this to Jamie. He's your son." Brittany walked forward. Her heels clicked on the hardwood. She crouched down. Not to help. To look Caroline in the eye. "Don't make this pathetic, Caroline. Have some dignity. He doesn't want you." Derek grabbed Caroline's arm and hauled her to her feet. She cried out in pain, instinctively curling her body around the car seat to protect Jamie. "Get out, Caroline, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." He shoved the other 2 suitcases onto the porch. Caroline stumbled backward onto the wet concrete. The rain immediately soaked through her thin coat. "Here." Derek threw a thick envelope at her feet. It landed in a puddle. $500. Should get you a motel for a few nights." He looked at her one last time. His eyes were empty. "Don't come back." The door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Caroline stood alone in the dark. The rain pounded against her skull. Inside the car seat, Jamie woke up and began to wail. She didn't remember walking to the bus stop. It was a blur of headlights, honking horns, and the rhythmic sobbing of her son. She sat on the metal bench, under the flimsy plastic shelter, shivering so violently, her teeth chattered. Her suitcase was soaked. The envelope of money was stuffed into her bra, the only safe place she could think of. Blood was running down her leg now, mixing with the rainwater pooling at her feet. She checked her phone. 14% battery. She scrolled through her contacts. Who could she call? Her mother had passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. It had eaten her alive in 6 months. Caroline had held her hand at the end, promising to be strong. Her father. She didn't even know his name, just that he was some businessman who had left before she was born. Her mother never talked about him. Whenever Caroline asked, her mother's eyes would go distant and sad. "He wasn't ready," was all she ever said. Some people aren't ready to be parents. Her friends most had drifted away after she married Derek. He had systematically isolated her, claiming her friends were low-value people who would drag her down. She dialed the local women's shelter. "I'm sorry, honey," a weary voice answered. "We're at capacity tonight. The storm brought everyone in. Try the Salvation Army downtown, but they usually fill up by 6. It was 9:30. Caroline hung up. She opened her banking app. Balance 42 to 50 cents. Derek had drained the joint savings account. He had left her with nothing. "It's okay, Jamie," she whispered, rocking the car seat. Her tears mixed with the rain dripping from her nose. "Mommy's here. Mommy's going to fix this." But she didn't know how. She was 27 years old, unemployed, homeless, recovering from major surgery, bleeding through her stitches, and holding a 2-day-old baby in a rainstorm. She had nothing. She was nothing. A car slowed down in front of the bus stop. Caroline tensed. Her hand moved protectively over Jamie. It wasn't a bus. It was a sleek black Bentley with tinted windows. It looked completely out of place in this neighborhood, gleaming under the streetlights like something from another world. Caroline's heart hammered. Was this a predator? Someone looking to take advantage of a vulnerable woman? She pulled the car seat closer. The rear window rolled down with a soft electric hum. "Mrs. Caroline Mitchell." Caroline froze. She hadn't heard her maiden name in 3 years. "Who's asking?" The car door opened. A woman stepped out. She was older, perhaps late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Caroline's yearly salary. She carried a large black umbrella, which she immediately extended to cover Caroline and the baby. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," the woman said. Her voice was crisp but kind. "I am the executor for the estate of William Hartley." Caroline stared at her blankly. "I don't know who that is. I think you have the wrong person." "I do not." Margaret looked at the suitcases, at the crying baby, at the blood-staining Caroline's coat. Her professional composure softened into genuine sympathy. "William Hartley passed away 4 days ago in Zurich. He was your father, Caroline." The world tilted. "My father—" Caroline shook her head. "No. My father was a deadbeat who left my mom before I was born. He wasn't anyone important." "He was complicated," Margaret corrected gently. "He made many mistakes. Leaving your mother was the biggest one. But he kept tabs on you, Caroline. He knew when you graduated high school. He knew when you got married. He knew when you became pregnant." She glanced toward the direction of the house Caroline had just been thrown out of. "He also knew your husband was unsatisfactory." Caroline let out a bitter, hysterical laugh. "Unsatisfactory. That's one word for it." "Mrs. Mitchell." Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. She offered it to Caroline. "Under the terms of Mr. Hartley's last will and testament, there were specific conditions regarding your inheritance. He wanted to ensure you were free of certain entanglements before any intervention. However, seeing your current situation, I believe I have the discretionary authority to accelerate the timeline." "Inheritance." Caroline wiped her face with the handkerchief. It smelled like lavender and expensive perfume. "I don't want his money. Where was he when my mom was dying? Where was he when I was eating ramen for dinner so Derek could buy his fancy suits?" "He paid for your mother's hospital bills anonymously," Margaret revealed quietly. "Every single one. He also paid for your college tuition. It was routed through a scholarship fund, so you wouldn't know. He watched from afar, Caroline. He was a coward in matters of the heart, but he was brilliant in matters of finance." Margaret paused. Her eyes met Caroline's. "And he has left you everything." "Everything. The Hartley Group, the real estate holdings, the tech patents, the majority shares in several global logistics firms." Margaret's voice dropped. "Including the parent company of Wellington Logistics." Caroline stopped breathing. "Wellington," she whispered. "Where Derek works. The very same." A glint of steel entered Margaret's eyes. "You now own 51% of the holding company that employs your husband. But we can discuss the portfolio later. Right now, you and young James need a warm place to sleep. You're bleeding and you need medical attention." She gestured toward the open door of the Bentley. The interior glowed with warm amber light. "Where are you taking me?" Caroline asked, hesitating. "To the Four Seasons for tonight, and tomorrow to the Hartley estate. It's your home now, Caroline. It's always been waiting for you." Caroline looked back at the dark street. Somewhere down that road, Derek was drinking whiskey with his 22-year-old girlfriend, celebrating his freedom. She looked at the Bentley. She looked at her son. "Margaret," she said slowly. "Yes. Does Derek know about any of this?" Margaret's lips curved into a thin, sharp smile. "No one knows. The will is sealed until you formally accept it. As far as the world is concerned, the Hartley Empire is in limbo. As far as your husband is concerned, you are homeless and helpless." Caroline stood up. The pain in her side flared, but she ignored it. She lifted the car seat with trembling arms and walked toward the Bentley. "Let's keep it that way," she said. "For now." The presidential suite at the Four Seasons was larger than the entire bungalow Caroline had shared with Derek. Margaret had arranged for a private doctor to come to the room. He cleaned her wound, replaced her stitches, and gave her antibiotics. A nurse checked Jamie's vitals and declared him perfectly healthy. For the first time in days, Caroline slept. She woke the next morning to the smell of fresh coffee and the sight of Seattle's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The Space Needle glittered in the morning sun. It wasn't just a new day, it was a new life. Margaret was waiting in the sitting area. A tablet and a stack of documents sat on the mahogany table. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell." She had already reverted to Caroline's maiden name. "I trust you slept well." "I did." Caroline wrapped a plush robe around herself. She felt different. The fear from last night had solidified into something cold and hard. Something that felt like armor. What happens now? Now we execute the transition. Margaret tapped the stack of papers. "You have inherited assets totaling approximately $1.4 billion. However, your father was a man of theatricality. He left you a video message." She handed Caroline an iPad and pressed play. A man appeared on screen. Caroline's breath caught. He looked like her. The same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same stubborn jaw. He was sitting in a sleek office, looking frail but intense. Machines beeped softly in the background. "Caroline." His voice was deep and rough. The voice of a man who had spent his life giving orders. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. I have no excuse for my absence in your life. I built an empire but failed to build a family. I was afraid. I was selfish. I told myself you were better off without me, but the truth is, I was a coward." He paused. His eyes glistened. "I leave you everything I have. My work, my burden, my power. But power must be wielded, Caroline, not just held." He leaned closer to the camera. "You're married to a man named Derek. My investigators tell me he's a small man with a big ego. If he's still by your side and treating you well, you may share this fortune with him. But if he has failed you..." William Hartley's eyes turned cold. "Then use my legacy to destroy him. Hartley blood does not suffer fools." He smiled. It was a sad, proud smile. "Welcome to the game, my daughter. Make me proud." The video ended. Caroline stared at the black screen. Her hands were shaking. "Destroy him," she whispered. "We have a situation developing," Margaret said, checking her phone. Her voice had turned businesslike. "This morning, Derek filed for divorce electronically. He cited irreconcilable differences and is petitioning for full custody of Jamie." "What?" "He's claiming you're mentally unstable, that you abandoned the family home, that you're homeless and therefore an unfit mother." Caroline's blood turned to ice. "He threw me out. He made me homeless. How can he..." "The law is a game of narratives, Caroline. Right now, Derek has a job, a home, and a lawyer. As of last night, you had nothing." Margaret set down her phone. "But the narrative changes today. I want him to pay." The words came out low and fierce, surprising even Caroline. "Not money. I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to feel small and helpless and worthless. I want him to know what it's like to have everything taken away." "Then we must be strategic," Margaret said. "The board of directors at the Hartley Group is meeting in 3 days to discuss the succession. They expect the company to be sold or divided. They don't know you exist." "I don't know the first thing about running a billion-dollar company, Margaret. I was a waitress. I clipped coupons." "You have your father's blood." Margaret stood. "And you have me. Your mother was my best friend, Caroline. I promised her I'd look after you if you ever needed it. I've been waiting for this moment for 27 years." She walked to the window and gazed out at the city. "Your father taught me everything I know about business. Now I'll teach you. The technical knowledge, the corporate strategy that can be learned, but the steel in your spine, the fire in your eyes." She turned back to Caroline. "That's already there. It's always been there. Derek just never saw it." Caroline looked at the tablet, at the frozen image of the father she never knew. She thought about the rain, the blood, the door slamming shut. She thought about Jamie sleeping in his carrier innocent and unaware that his father had thrown him away like garbage. Something shifted inside her. The old Caroline, the one who smiled through pain, who apologized for existing, who made herself small so Derek could feel big, that woman died on the sidewalk in the rain. The woman who stood up now was someone new. 3 days, Caroline said. What do I need to learn? Margaret smiled. It was the smile of a chess master who had just found her protégé. Everything. The next 72 hours broke Caroline down and rebuilt her from the bones out. Margaret didn't coddle her. She didn't offer sympathy or gentle encouragement. She pushed Caroline to the edge of exhaustion, then pushed harder. Your father built his empire in 18-hour days, Margaret said on the first morning, setting a stack of financial reports on the dining table. You have 3 days to learn what took him 30 years, so we skip sleep. Caroline picked up the first folder. The numbers blurred together. Holding companies, subsidiaries, acquisition strategies. It was like reading a foreign language. I don't understand any of this. You will. Margaret poured her a cup of black coffee. Start with page 1. Read it out loud. When you don't understand a word, stop and ask. We'll be here all night if we have to. They were. At 2 in the morning, Caroline's eyes burned. Jamie had woken up 3 times for feeding. Her stitches ached, her head pounded, but something was clicking. So the Hartley Group owns Apex Holdings, Caroline said slowly, tracing the organizational chart with her finger. And Apex Holdings owns Wellington Logistics, which means Derek's entire career exists because my father allowed it to exist. Margaret smiled. Now you're thinking like a Hartley. My father could have destroyed him years ago. Why didn't he? Because you loved Derek. William respected that even though he despised the man. He hoped Derek would prove worthy of you. Margaret's expression hardened. He was wrong, but he left you the tools to correct that mistake. Caroline stared at the chart. Wellington Logistics was a tiny box at the bottom of a massive pyramid. Derek thought he was climbing to the top of the world. He had no idea he was an ant crawling on the shoe of a giant that now belonged to her. What's Derek doing right now? Caroline asked. At the company. He's preparing a pitch for a major government contract. Logistics support for federal emergency management. It's worth $200 million over 5 years. If he lands it, he becomes VP. If he fails, his career stalls indefinitely. When's the pitch? 4 days from now, at Apex headquarters. Can I be there? Margaret's eyes glittered. As the majority shareholder of the parent company, you can be anywhere you want. The question is whether you want Derek to see you coming. Caroline thought about the rain, the blood, the $500 thrown at her feet like she was a beggar. No, she said. I want it to be a surprise. Then we have work to do. The transformation wasn't just mental, it was physical. On the second day, a team descended on the suite. Stylists, image consultants, a personal shopper from Nordstrom who arrived with 3 racks of designer clothing. Caroline stood in front of the mirror as a woman named Diane cut her hair into a sharp, powerful bob. Shorter, Caroline said. Are you sure it's already quite? Shorter. I want him to look at me and not recognize the woman he threw away. Diane cut. The hair fell to the floor in long brown strands. With each snip, Caroline felt lighter. The woman in the mirror started to look like someone else. Someone harder. Someone dangerous. Better, Caroline said. The flannel and sweatpants disappeared. In their place came tailored Armani suits and Louboutin heels. A Cartier watch. Pearl earrings that cost more than Derek's car. But the most important work happened at the table with Margaret. The board members will try to intimidate you, Margaret warned. They've been running this company for decades. They don't want some unknown heir walking in and disrupting their power structure. What do? You don't blink. You don't apologize. You don't explain yourself. You walk in like you own the place because you do. If they challenge you, you remind them who signs their paychecks. That's simple. Power is always simple, Caroline. The people who have it want you to think it's complicated so you won't try to take it. But it's not. It's just about who's willing to act and who's willing to fold. Caroline practiced. She practiced walking in heels until her feet bled. She practiced her handshake until her grip was firm enough to make a man wince. She practiced her voice until the tremor disappeared and only steel remained. On the third morning, Margaret handed her a tablet. "Derek filed additional motions yesterday," she said. "He's claiming you had a mental breakdown after childbirth. He's submitted a statement from Brittany Collins saying she witnessed you behaving erratically in the weeks before delivery. He's asking the court to grant him emergency temporary custody of Jamie." Caroline's blood turned to ice. "He's trying to take my son. He's trying to use your son as leverage. He assumes you'll cave, that you'll sign over whatever he wants to get Jamie back. He's betting on your love for your child making you weak." "He's wrong. I know." Margaret pulled up another document. "I've retained Helen Chen as your divorce attorney. She's the best in Seattle. She's already filed a counter motion. But we need evidence, Caroline. Something that proves Derek is the aggressor, not you." Caroline's mind raced. "The Ring camera." "What?" "We had a Ring doorbell camera. Derek installed it last year because he was paranoid about package thieves. I don't think he remembers it still recording." Margaret's eyes widened. "If that camera captured the night he threw you out, it captured everything, every word, every shove, the rain, the suitcases, all of it. Can you access the footage?" "The account is in my name. Derek never bothered to learn how it worked. He just wanted it installed." Caroline grabbed her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. "I still have the login." She pulled up the app. The footage was there, time-stamped, crystal clear. She watched herself begging on her knees. Watched Derek grab her arm. Watched him throw the money at her feet. "Get out, Caroline, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Caroline's jaw tightened. "Download it," Margaret said. "Multiple copies. Cloud storage, external drives. We cannot lose this." "Done." Margaret leaned back in her chair. A rare smile crossed her face. "He handed you the knife, Caroline. Now we just have to decide where to put it." That afternoon, Caroline received an unexpected visitor. A knock at the suite door. Margaret answered it and returned with a puzzled expression. "There's a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Brittany Collins." Caroline's entire body went rigid. "Send her away. She says she has information. She says she's sorry." Every instinct screamed at Caroline to refuse. This was the woman who had stood in her kitchen wearing her robe. The woman who had told her to have some dignity while she begged for shelter. But something in Margaret's expression made her pause. What kind of information? She wouldn't say, only that it's about Derek, and that you need to hear it. Caroline's hands clenched into fists. 5 minutes, and you stay in the room." Margaret nodded and opened the door. Brittany walked in. She looked nothing like the confident, smirking woman from 3 nights ago. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her makeup was smeared. She clutched her purse like a shield. "I know you hate me," Brittany said immediately. Her voice shook. "I deserve it. I was horrible to you. I said things that I can never take back." "You're right," Caroline said coldly. "You can't. Why are you here?" Brittany's lower lip trembled. "He kicked me out." The words hung in the air. "What?" "Last night, Derek came home drunk. He was ranting about lawyers and custody and how expensive everything was going to be. I tried to calm him down and he—" Brittany touched her cheek. For the first time, Caroline noticed the faint purple bruise beneath the concealer. "He hit me. Then he told me to get out. He said I was a distraction he couldn't afford anymore." Caroline felt nothing. No sympathy. No satisfaction. Just a cold, clinical observation of karma in action. And you came here because I know things. Brittany's voice dropped. Things that could help you. Derek's been stealing from Wellington, padding his expense reports, taking clients to hotels and charging them as business dinners. There's a whole second set of books. I've seen them. Margaret stepped forward. Do you have proof? I can get it. I still have access to his laptop password. He never changed it. Brittany looked at Caroline desperately. I know this doesn't make up for what I did. I know I was part of hurting you. But he used me too, Caroline. He told me you were cold and distant. He told me your marriage was already over. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. That's not an excuse. I know. But I can help you destroy him. Please. Let me help. Caroline studied the younger woman. The desperation, the bruise, the shattered illusions. 3 days ago, she would have thrown Brittany out, would have screamed at her and slammed the door. But the woman standing here now wasn't the same Caroline who had begged on her knees in the rain. This Caroline calculated. The expense reports, she said. Can you get them by tomorrow? Hope flickered in Brittany's eyes. Yes, I can email them to you tonight. Do it. Send everything. Every document, every receipt, every email where he discusses the fraud. I will, I promise. And Brittany. Caroline's voice turned to ice. If you're lying to me, if this is some trick Derek put you up to, I will end you. Not just your career, your entire life. Do you understand? Brittany swallowed hard. I understand. Then get out. And don't contact me again until you have those files. Brittany fled. Margaret closed the door behind her and turned to Caroline with raised eyebrows. That was unexpected. She's scared and desperate. Scared desperate people make good weapons. And if she's playing you, then I'll know by tonight, and I'll adjust accordingly. Margaret studied Caroline with something that looked almost like pride. Your father would have made the exact same calculation. Good. The files arrived at 11 p.m. Brittany hadn't lied. The documents were damning. Expense reports with inflated numbers, receipts for client dinners that were actually romantic getaways, emails between Derek and a colleague discussing how to hide the discrepancies from accounting. This is embezzlement, Margaret said, scrolling through the evidence. Not just padding expenses. He's been systematically stealing from Wellington for at least 18 months. We're looking at somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000. Can he go to prison for this? Potentially. More likely he'll be fired, blacklisted from the industry, and forced to pay restitution. His career will be over. Caroline stared at the screen. $50,000. That was how much Derek had stolen while telling her they couldn't afford better health insurance, while making her feel guilty for buying name-brand cereal. Save everything, Caroline said. But don't use it yet. Why not? Because I don't want to just fire him. I want him to fire himself. I want him to walk into that boardroom thinking he's about to become VP. I want him to give his little presentation with that smug smile on his face, and then I want him to look up and see me sitting in the chairman's seat. Margaret nodded slowly. You want him to experience hope before you crush it. I want him to feel exactly what I felt. That moment when you think everything is going to be okay, and then the floor drops out from under you. That's cruel, Caroline. I know. Your father would be proud. I know that too. The morning of the board meeting arrived. Caroline stood in front of the mirror in her suite, wearing a white Armani suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was sleek. Her makeup was flawless. The pearl earrings caught the light when she moved. She didn't recognize herself. Good. Margaret appeared behind her holding Jamie in her arms. He was awake, his tiny fist waving in the air, completely oblivious to the war his mother was about to wage. The car is ready, Margaret said. Are you... Caroline took Jamie from her. She held him close, breathing in his baby smell, feeling his warmth against her chest. When I was in labor, she said quietly. I kept thinking about what kind of mother I would be. I promised myself I would protect him. I would give him everything I never had. A stable home, 2 parents who loved each other, a father who would never leave. She looked up at Margaret. Derek broke every one of those promises before Jamie was a week old. He looked at his own son and saw a burden, an inconvenience. She handed Jamie back to Margaret. Today, I'm going to show my son what it looks like when someone tries to break you and fails. I'm going to show him that his mother is not someone to be thrown away. Margaret's eyes glistened. Your mother would be proud too, Caroline. She raised you right. She raised me to survive. What I'm about to do, that's all me. The drive to Apex headquarters took 20 minutes. Caroline sat in the back of the Bentley reviewing her notes one final time. The organizational charts, the financial summaries, the embezzlement evidence waiting in her phone like a loaded gun. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. One more thing, Margaret said as they pulled up to the building. The board doesn't know you're coming. I've arranged for you to enter through the executive elevator. You'll walk into that room and no one will know who you are until you sit down in the chairman's chair. What about Derek? He's already inside. He arrived an hour early to set up his presentation. He's nervous. Our source says he's been pacing and checking his notes obsessively. Good. Let him be nervous. Let him think everything depends on this pitch. Because it does, Margaret said. Just not the way he thinks. The Bentley stopped. Caroline stepped out. The headquarters of Apex Holdings rose above her 40 stories of glass and steel. Somewhere up there, Derek was rehearsing his lies, planning his ascent, dreaming of corner offices and expense accounts. He had no idea what was coming. Caroline walked through the lobby. Security guards nodded at her. Receptionists glanced up and quickly looked away, intimidated by something in her posture they couldn't name. She stepped into the executive elevator. The doors closed. She watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. At 40, the elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a corridor lined with original artwork and leather furniture. The executive floor, where the real power lived. Margaret was waiting for her. They're all inside, she said. Henderson, the CEO of Apex, the 6 board members, Greg, Derek's supervisor, and Derek himself. He's already started his presentation. How's it going? He's nervous, stumbling over his words, but the board seems receptive. They don't know any better. Caroline straightened her jacket. They will in about 5 minutes. She walked toward the boardroom doors. Margaret fell into step beside her. Any final instructions? When I sit down, don't say anything. Let them figure it out themselves. And when Derek inevitably loses his mind and calls for security, Caroline smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. Make sure they know who they actually work for. Margaret nodded. Caroline reached the doors. She could hear Derek's voice inside, muffled but confident, slipping into the rhythm of his pitch. She took one deep breath. Then she opened the doors and walked into her destiny. The boardroom fell silent. Every head turned. Derek was standing at the front of the room mid-sentence, his hand frozen over a slide showing projected revenue increases. His face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, horror. Caroline. She didn't look at him. She walked past the long mahogany table, past the stunned board members, past the CEO who was half rising from his seat with a question on his lips. She walked straight to the head of the table. The chairman's chair. She sat down, and she smiled. Please, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Continue, Mr. Harrison. I'm very interested to hear how you plan to spend my money. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Caroline, his voice cracked. What the hell are you doing here? This is a private meeting. You can't just... Mr. Harrison. Mr. Henderson, the CEO of Apex, cut him off sharply. His face had gone pale. I suggest you stop talking. But she's my ex-wife. She's mentally unstable. She followed me here. Someone call security. Mr. Harrison? Henderson's voice could have frozen fire. That woman is Caroline Hartley. She is the sole heir of William Hartley. As of 4 days ago, she owns 51% of the Hartley Group, which owns Apex Holdings, which owns Wellington Logistics. He turned to Caroline, his expression shifting from authority to deference in an instant. Which means she owns you, and me, and everyone in this room. The silence that followed was absolute. Derek stared at Caroline. His brain visibly short-circuited. She could see him trying to reconcile the woman in front of him, sleek, powerful, draped in white Armani, with the woman he'd thrown into the rain 5 days ago. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Your father was nobody. You told me he left before you were born. You said he was a deadbeat." "I said I never knew him," Caroline corrected. Her voice was steady, cold, unrecognizable. "I didn't say he was nobody. I assumed he was. Turns out assumptions can be dangerous, Derek. You assumed I was worthless too." She leaned back in the chairman's chair, crossing her legs. "Now, as I said, please continue your presentation. I flew across the city to hear it. I'd hate for all your preparation to go to waste." Derek's hands trembled. He looked at the board members for support, but they were all staring at their folded hands, refusing to meet his eyes. I can't." "You can't what? Speak, think, function." Caroline tilted her head. "That's interesting. 5 days ago you had plenty to say. What was it again? You're a mess, Caroline. No ambition. Content living paycheck to paycheck. Ring any bells?" Derek's face flushed crimson. "That was private. That was between us." "Nothing is private anymore, Derek. Not when you filed for divorce claiming I'm mentally unstable. Not when you petitioned for emergency custody of our son. Not when you threw a 2-day-old baby into a rainstorm and called him an inconvenience." Carolyn's voice dropped. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Greg, Derek's supervisor, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Ms. Hartley, perhaps we should reschedule this presentation. Mr. Harrison is clearly unprepared," Caroline interrupted. "But that's nothing new, is it? I've reviewed his work, Greg. His projections for the government contract are based on outdated fuel cost estimates. He hasn't accounted for the Pacific sector tariff changes, and his proposed subcontractors have a documented history of labor violations that would disqualify this bid before it even reached committee review." She turned to the board. "Is this the level of competence Wellington Logistics operates with? Because if so, I have serious concerns about our subsidiary management." Henderson cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartley, I assure you, Mr. Harrison's performance is not representative of—" "I'm not finished." Henderson fell silent. Caroline pulled out her phone. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. "Derek, do you remember the Ring camera you installed at our house last year? The one you made me set up because you couldn't figure out the app?" Derek's face went white. "I still have the login. I downloaded the footage from 5 nights ago. Every second of it. The part where you dragged my suitcases to the porch. The part where you grabbed my arm while I was still bleeding from surgery. The part where you threw $500 at my feet and told me not to come back." She held up the phone. "Should I play it for the board? I'm sure they'd love to see the character of the man representing their company." "Caroline, don't." Derek's voice was barely a whisper. "Please. Please." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what I said too. Please, Derek, just 1 week. Don't do this to Jamie." "Do you remember what you told me?" "I was angry. I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking perfectly clearly. You'd been planning it for weeks. The suitcases were packed. Brittany was already wearing my robe. You executed your plan exactly the way you intended." Caroline set the phone down on the table. "The only thing you didn't plan for was me fighting back." Henderson raised a tentative hand. "Ms. Hartley, while I understand your personal grievances with Mr. Harrison, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue." "You're right." Caroline stood up. "This isn't about personal grievances. This is about business, specifically the business of embezzlement." Derek stumbled backward. What? I have documentation showing that over the past 18 months you've systematically defrauded Wellington Logistics. Inflated expense reports, fictitious client dinners, hotel charges for personal trips billed to the company account. The total exceeds $70,000. She looked at Henderson. I trust Apex has protocols for dealing with employee theft. Henderson's face had gone from pale to ashen. We do. If these allegations are substantiated, they're substantiated. I have emails, receipts, and a witness willing to testify. Caroline smiled thinly. Brittany Collins sends her regards, Derek. It seems loyalty isn't your strong suit with anyone. Derek's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the conference table to keep from falling. Brittany told you she wouldn't. She loves me. She loved what you represented. Money, status, a ticket to the good life. But you hit her, Derek. You threw her out just like you threw me out. The only difference is, she decided to burn you on the way down. Caroline walked around the table, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She stopped directly in front of Derek, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. Here's what's going to happen. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You'll surrender your company car, your laptop, and your access badges. Any attempt to contact Wellington clients or employees will be considered a breach of your non-compete clause and prosecuted accordingly. Derek's mouth moved, but no sound came out. As for the embezzlement charges, I'm giving you a choice. You can repay the full amount within 30 days, or I can forward this evidence to the district attorney's office. White-collar crime is taken very seriously in this state, Derek. You could be looking at 3 to 5 years. I don't have $70,000, Derek choked out. You know I don't. Everything we had. Everything you had was mine. The savings you drained from our joint account. That was my waitressing money. The salary you earned at Wellington. That came from a company my father built. You never had anything that wasn't given to you, Derek. She leaned in close. But you can figure it out. Sell your suits, pawn your watch, get a second job. You're so full of ambition, right? So driven, so destined for greatness. Here's your chance to prove it. She straightened up and addressed the room. This meeting is adjourned. Mr. Henderson, I'll expect a full review of Wellington's management structure on my desk by Friday. If there are other employees operating with Mr. Harrison's ethical standards, I want them identified and removed. Yes, ma'am. Caroline walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle and looked back at Derek one last time. He was still standing where she'd left him, frozen, destroyed, a shell of the man who had strutted into this room 40 minutes ago, expecting to become vice president. Oh, and Derek, I almost forgot. She pulled a folded document from her jacket pocket and tossed it at his feet. That's a restraining order. You're to stay 500 feet away from me and Jamie at all times. If you violate it, you go to jail. If you try to contact me through lawyers' proxies or social media, you go to jail. If you so much as breathe in my son's direction, you go to jail. She opened the door. The custody hearing is next week. I'd wish you luck, but we both know you're going to need a lot more than that. The door closed behind her. In the hallway, Margaret was waiting with a look of barely contained satisfaction. How did it go? Caroline kept walking her stride purposeful, her chin high. He cried. Good. He begged. Even better. He's going to try to fight back. He's too arrogant to accept defeat. Let him try. Margaret fell into step beside her. He's bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. You have every legal and financial advantage. His career is over. His reputation is destroyed. The only question now is how much of his dignity he's willing to sacrifice before he accepts reality. They stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Caroline allowed herself one deep breath. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. No. Margaret pressed the button for the ground floor. That was the easiest part. The hard part comes next. What do you mean? Derek isn't the type to go quietly. He's been humiliated in front of the most powerful people in his industry. His ego won't let that stand. He's going to lash out. He's going to try to hurt you any way he can. What can he do? He has nothing. He has desperation, and desperate men do desperate things. Margaret's expression was grave. Watch your back, Caroline. The cornered rat is the most dangerous. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Caroline arrived at the courthouse at 8 a.m., flanked by Margaret and her attorney, Helen Chen. She wore a conservative navy dress and minimal jewelry. Professional, maternal, unassailable. Derek was already there. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. He was talking rapidly to his attorney, a slick-haired man named Robert Slate, who was known for aggressive scorched-earth divorce tactics. When Derek saw Caroline walk in, something twisted in his face. Hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. "She's trying to steal my son," he hissed to Slate loud enough for Caroline to hear. "My own flesh and blood. She can't do this." Slate placed a calming hand on his arm. "Let me handle this." The courtroom filled. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Morrison, took her seat and reviewed the case files. "We're here today to determine temporary custody arrangements for the minor child James Mitchell Harrison pending final divorce proceedings. I've reviewed the motions from both parties." She looked up. "Mr. Slate, your client is seeking full custody based on claims of maternal instability. Is that correct?" Slate stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have evidence that Mrs. Harrison abandoned the family home less than a week after giving birth. She has since come into a large sum of money and has been using those resources to harass and intimidate my client. We believe she is suffering from postpartum psychosis exacerbated by sudden wealth, and that the child would be safer in his father's care." Judge Morrison's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Chen." Helen stood. She was small, unassuming, with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like warm honey. Juries loved her. Opposing counsel feared her. "Your Honor, my client did not abandon her home. She was forcibly removed by Mr. Harrison while she was still recovering from cesarean surgery. She was thrown out into a rainstorm with a 2-day-old infant and $500 in cash. Mr. Harrison then immediately moved his mistress into the family home." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. "We have video evidence of this incident," Helen continued. "Time-stamped footage from the home's security camera showing Mr. Harrison physically grabbing my client, shoving her belongings onto the porch and slamming the door in her face while she begged for shelter." She handed a USB drive to the bailiff. "I'd like to submit this as Exhibit A." Slate jumped up. "Objection. This footage was obtained without my client's consent. The camera system was registered in my client's name. She has every legal right to access recordings from her own security device." Judge Morrison held up a hand. "Overruled. I'll allow it." The video played on the courtroom monitors. The audio was crisp. The visuals were clear. Every word Derek had spoken that night echoed through the chamber. "Get out, Caroline, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Here, $500. Should get you a motel for a few nights. Don't come back." The slam of the door reverberated like a thunderclap. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison stared at Derek for a long moment. Her expression had shifted from neutrality to barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Slate, is this your idea of a loving father?" Slate scrambled. "Your Honor, my client was under extreme stress. He made a mistake. He's since sought counseling. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. Throwing your wife and newborn into a storm is not a mistake. It's a choice." She turned to Helen. "Is there anything else?" "Yes, Your Honor. We'd also like to submit documentation showing that Mr. Harrison has been systematically embezzling funds from his employer. He was terminated 3 days ago. He currently has no stable income and is facing potential criminal charges. We believe these factors, combined with the video evidence of his volatile behavior, make him an unsuitable custodial parent." Slate looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Derek grabbed his arm. "Do something," he hissed. "Say something." "There's nothing to say," Slate muttered back. "She's destroyed us." Judge Morrison reviewed the documents Helen had submitted. Her face grew grimmer with each page. "Mr. Harrison, I'm going to be blunt with you. In 23 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a clear-cut case of parental unfitness. You abandoned your wife and child. You're facing criminal charges for financial fraud. And you have the audacity to stand in my courtroom and claim she's the unstable one." She set down the papers. "I'm granting full legal and physical custody to Ms. Hartley. Mr. Harrison, you are hereby ordered to stay 500 feet away from both the mother and child. Any attempt to contact them directly or through intermediaries will result in immediate arrest." Derek shot to his feet. "You can't do this. He's my son. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Judge Morrison said coldly. "I suggest you exercise it. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Derek's attorney pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. The judge continued. "Furthermore, given the video evidence of financial abuse, I'm ordering a forensic audit of Mr. Harrison's accounts. Any assets hidden during the marriage will be subject to equitable distribution. Ms. Hartley, you're entitled to spousal support for the duration you supported Mr. Harrison through his education and early career." Caroline felt the words wash over her like warm rain. It was over. She had won. "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Caroline stood. Her legs were trembling, but she kept her composure. She turned to look at Derek one last time. He was slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders shook. He was crying. For a split second she felt something. Not sympathy, not satisfaction, just emptiness. This was the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed for, the man she had built her entire life around. And now he was nothing. She turned away and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, Margaret was waiting with Jamie in her arms. The baby was awake, his dark eyes. Derek's eyes, she realized with a pang, blinking up at her curiously. "It's done," Caroline said, taking her son. "He's mine. Just mine." "How do you feel?" Caroline held Jamie close, breathing in his scent, feeling his warmth. "I feel free." But the freedom didn't last. 3 days after the custody ruling, Derek went on television. Caroline was in her new office at the Hartley Group headquarters when Margaret burst in her face white. "Turn on the news, now!" Caroline grabbed the remote. The screen flickered to life. Derek was standing on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. He wore a clean suit, probably the last one he owned, and an expression of wounded righteousness. "Caroline Hartley is a fraud," he announced to the cameras. "She plays the victim, she plays the saint, but she's lying to everyone, to the media, to the courts, to her own shareholders." He held up a piece of paper. "I have proof that Jamie is not my biological son, and I have reason to believe he's not her biological son either." Caroline's blood turned to ice. "The Hartley will had a secret clause," Derek continued, his voice rising. "It required an heir within 1 year of death to unlock the billions. Caroline knew I couldn't give her a child, so she faked the pregnancy. She used a surrogate, or she bought a baby on the black market to steal an inheritance she had no right to." The reporters erupted with questions. Caroline couldn't breathe. "It's a lie," she whispered. "It's all lies." "Of course it is." Margaret grabbed her arm. "But lies spread faster than truth. We need to respond, now." Caroline stared at the screen, at Derek's smug, desperate face, at the hungry eyes of the reporters, drinking in every word. He was trying to destroy her, trying to take everything she'd built, and he was using her son to do it. Something inside Caroline shifted. The last traces of softness, of mercy, of hesitation burned away like morning fog. "Get me a camera crew," she said, "and call every news outlet in the city." Margaret blinked. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell them the truth." Caroline's eyes were hard as diamonds. All of it. The studio lights burned white-hot. Caroline sat across from Diane Crawford, Seattle's most watched evening news anchor. The interview had been arranged in 3 hours. Every major network had wanted the exclusive. Caroline had chosen Diane because she was known for asking hard questions without ambush tactics. She needed hard questions tonight. "Ms. Hartley," Diane began, her voice measured and professional. "Your ex-husband made explosive allegations this afternoon. He claims your son Jamie is not biologically his. He claims you faked your pregnancy to satisfy a clause in your father's will. How do you respond?" Caroline looked directly into the camera. She imagined Derek sitting in whatever hole he was hiding in, watching this feed thinking he had finally won. "My father's will is a matter of public record," she said, her voice steady and clear. "There was never a clause requiring an heir. Any first-year law student could verify that in 5 minutes. Derek would know that too if he had ever bothered to read a document properly in his life." A faint smile touched her lips. But as his recent firing for incompetence suggests, attention to detail was never his strength. Diane leaned forward. "But what about the biological claims he says he has medical evidence that he could not have fathered Jamie?" Caroline took a breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. "Derek is right about one thing," she said softly. "Jamie is not his biological son." Diane's eyes widened. The control room went silent. 2 years ago," Caroline continued, "Derek and I went to a fertility clinic. We had been trying to conceive for 8 months with no success. The doctors ran tests on both of us. They found that Derek had severe fertility issues. His sperm count was extremely low. The doctor told him to his face that natural conception would be nearly impossible." She paused, letting the words sink in. But Derek couldn't accept that. His ego wouldn't allow him to be anything less than perfect. So he went into denial. He suppressed the memory. "He told me the doctors said everything was fine. He said we just needed to keep trying." Caroline's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I wanted a baby. More than anything in the world. And I loved Derek. Despite everything, I loved him enough to protect his pride. So I made a choice." She looked directly into the camera. "I used a sperm donor." The studio was dead silent. "I never told Derek. I couldn't bear to hurt him. I let him believe he was the father. I carried that secret alone for our entire pregnancy. I watched him put his hand on my belly and talk to his son, knowing the truth would destroy him." Caroline's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I protected a man who would eventually throw his newborn into a rainstorm. I shielded his ego while he was secretly planning to leave me for a 22-year-old intern. I gave him the gift of fatherhood, and he spat on it." She straightened in her chair. "So yes, Derek, you're right. You have no biological claim to Jamie, not because of some conspiracy, not because I'm a fraud, but because you couldn't give me a child and you were too proud to admit it. I covered for you. I loved you enough to carry that burden alone." She looked back at Diane. "And this is how he repays me. By going on television and trying to humiliate me with a truth I already know, a truth I created to protect him." Diane was visibly moved. "Ms. Hartley, that's an incredible sacrifice. Carrying a secret like that for years." "It was a mistake," Caroline said, her voice hardening. "I tried to protect a man who didn't deserve protection. I won't make that mistake again." "What happens now? With the custody arrangement, with your company?" "Nothing changes. I have full legal custody of Jamie. Derek has no parental rights because he signed away any claim when he threw us out. The courts have already ruled. As for my company..." Caroline smiled coldly. The Hartley Group's stock actually went up 2% after Derek's press conference. Apparently, investors prefer a CEO who can handle crisis over a disgraced ex-husband spreading desperate lies. Diane nodded slowly. "One final question, Ms. Hartley. If you could say anything to Derek right now, what would it be?" Caroline turned to face the camera directly. She imagined Derek's face. His shock. His humiliation. his impotent rage. "I would say this. You wanted to erase Jamie from your life. You called him a burden. You threw him into the rain like garbage. So I gave you what you wanted. I erased you from his life instead. You're not his father. You never were. And now the whole world knows why." She held the camera's gaze for a long moment. "Goodbye, Derek." The interview ended. Across the city, in a dingy motel room that smelled of cigarette smoke and despair, Derek Harrison sat on the edge of a stained mattress, the remote trembling in his hand. He stared at the television screen, at Caroline's face, at her calm, devastating words. Sterile. The word echoed in his skull like a death knell. She had told the entire world he was sterile, that he couldn't father a child, that she had pitied him enough to hide the truth. He wasn't the hero exposing a fraud. He was the pathetic, delusional ex-husband who had forced his wife to reveal her greatest act of mercy. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Twitter notifications, text messages, voicemails. He didn't need to look at them. He knew what they said. He was a joke, a laughingstock, a cautionary tale. His hands clenched into fists, his vision blurred with rage. She had done this. She had turned his attack into her victory. She had taken his last weapon and used it to destroy him. He grabbed the remote and hurled it at the television. The screen shattered, sparks flying, the image of Caroline's face fragmenting into a spiderweb of cracks. But even broken, her eyes seemed to stare at him, mocking, triumphant. "This isn't over," he whispered to the darkness. "This isn't over." But it was. The days that followed were a masterclass in public destruction. Derek's interview backfired catastrophically. Social media exploded with mockery. Hashtags like #SterileDerek and #ProtectedHisEgo trended for 3 days straight. Comedians made jokes about him on late-night television. News analysts dissected his failed strategy as an example of how not to handle a public relations crisis. His lawyer, Robert Slate, dropped him, called it irreconcilable differences in case strategy. Translation: Derek had become radioactive, and no reputable attorney wanted to be associated with him. The embezzlement charges moved forward. The district attorney's office, emboldened by the public attention, announced they were pursuing criminal prosecution. Derek faced a maximum sentence of 5 years if convicted. His bank accounts were frozen pending the forensic audit. His credit cards were maxed out. His car had been repossessed. He was living on borrowed time in a borrowed room, eating ramen noodles and watching his life disintegrate one headline at a time. 3 weeks after the interview, he hit rock bottom. He was sitting in the motel room, surrounded by empty beer cans and crumpled fast food wrappers, when his phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something, desperation maybe, or the last flicker of hope, made him pick up. "Mr. Harrison." A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. "Who is this?" "My name is Patricia Vance. I represent Mrs. Caroline Hartley." Derek's grip tightened on the phone. "What does she want?" "Mrs. Hartley has authorized me to make you an offer. A one-time offer. I suggest you listen carefully." Derek said nothing. His heart hammered against his ribs. "The embezzlement charges against you carry a maximum sentence of 5 years. However, Mrs. Hartley is willing to use her influence to have those charges reduced to a misdemeanor. Probation instead of prison time." "Why would she do that?" "Because Mrs. Hartley is not interested in your imprisonment. She's interested in your disappearance." Derek frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means she wants you gone, Mr. Harrison. Out of Seattle, out of Washington State, out of her life permanently. In exchange for the reduced charges, you will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak publicly about Mrs. Hartley, her son, or any aspect of your marriage. You will relocate to a destination of your choosing at least 1,000 miles from Seattle, and you will never attempt to contact her or Jamie again." Derek's jaw clenched. "And if I refuse?" Then Mrs. Hartley will pursue the embezzlement charges to the fullest extent of the law. She will also file a civil suit for defamation based on your false allegations about Jamie's parentage. Given your current financial state, a judgment against you would result in wage garnishment for the rest of your working life. You would never escape this." The silence stretched. "Why is she offering me anything?" Derek finally asked. "She hates me. She destroyed me. Why not just let me rot?" Patricia's voice softened slightly. "Because Mrs. Hartley wants closure. She wants to know that you're gone, truly gone, and that you can never resurface to cause problems. She's offering you a lifeline, Mr. Harrison. I suggest you take it." Derek stared at the wall, at the water stains and peeling paint. This was it, the final humiliation, the ultimate admission of defeat. He would have to sign away his voice, his presence, his very existence in Caroline's world. He would become a ghost, exiled to some forgotten corner of the country, living out his days in anonymity. But the alternative was prison, financial ruin, a lifetime of shame. "Where do I sign?" he whispered. "I'll send the documents to your motel. You have 48 hours to review and return them. Once signed, you'll have 2 weeks to leave the state." The line went dead. Derek sat in the darkness for a long time. Then he laughed. It was a broken, hollow sound, devoid of humor or joy. The laugh of a man who had finally accepted that he had lost. Not just the battle, the war. He had thrown Caroline into the rain, thinking he was discarding a burden. And she had risen from the storm like a phoenix, burning everything he had ever been to ashes. The papers arrived the next morning. Derek signed them without reading the fine print. What did it matter? He had nothing left to protect. 2 weeks later, he boarded a bus to Ohio, a small industrial town where no one knew his name, where no one would ever connect him to the billionaire heiress who had once begged on her knees for shelter. He found a job at a logistics warehouse. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder at Wellington Logistics, dreaming of corner offices and executive bonuses. Now he was moving boxes for $12 an hour. His supervisor was a 23-year-old kid who called him "old man" and made fun of his wrinkled shirts. His apartment was a studio above a laundromat. The walls vibrated when the machines ran. The smell of detergent seeped through the floorboards. He had no friends, no girlfriend, no future. Just the endless grinding routine of work, sleep, and regret. Some nights, he would sit by the window and stare at the parking lot, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. He had been so sure of himself, so confident that he was destined for greatness, that Caroline was holding him back, that Brittany was his ticket to a better life. Now Brittany was gone. His career was gone. His son, if Jamie had ever been his son, was gone. All he had left was the memory of Caroline's face on that television screen, her calm, devastating words. "You wanted to erase Jamie from your life, so I erased you from his instead." She had won, completely, utterly, permanently. And he would spend the rest of his life knowing that everything he had lost, he had thrown away with his own hands. 6 months passed. Caroline stood in her office at the Hartley Group, reviewing quarterly reports. The company had grown by 18% under her leadership. Analysts were calling her a natural. Business magazines requested interviews. Harvard Business School wanted her to speak at their commencement. But none of that mattered as much as the photograph on her desk. Jamie, now 8 months old, laughing at the camera with Derek's dark eyes and her own stubborn chin. He would never know his biological father. Caroline had made sure of that. The sperm donor records were sealed. The truth was buried so deep that no one would ever find it. Jamie would grow up believing he was the product of Caroline's love and determination. Nothing more. It was better this way. Margaret knocked on the open door. The final report on Derek came in. Carolyn looked up. And he's in Ohio, working at a warehouse, living in a studio apartment, no social media presence, no contact with anyone from his former life. He's effectively disappeared. Caroline nodded slowly. Good. There's something else. Margaret hesitated. Our investigator found this. She handed Caroline a photograph. It showed Derek sitting alone at a bus stop. He looked 20 years older than he had 6 months ago. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were empty. He was holding a cup of coffee and staring at nothing. Caroline studied the image for a long moment. She should have felt satisfaction, triumph, the sweet taste of revenge fulfilled. But she felt nothing. Derek was broken, destroyed, exactly as she had intended. And it didn't bring her mother back. It didn't erase the years she had spent supporting his dreams while he crushed hers. It didn't heal the wound of being thrown into the rain with a 2-day-old baby. Revenge, she realized, was empty. It was a meal that filled you in the moment, but left you hungry an hour later. What do you want to do with this? Margaret asked. Caroline tore the photograph in half, then in quarters. She dropped the pieces in the trash. Nothing. He doesn't exist anymore. She turned back to the window to the city spread out below her. I have more important things to focus on. Margaret smiled. Like what? Caroline picked up Jamie's photograph. She traced his smile with her finger. Like building something that matters, something that lasts. My father built an empire of wealth. I want to build an empire of hope. What does that mean? It means we're launching a foundation. The Hartley Foundation for Displaced Mothers and Children, shelters, legal aid, job training, everything I needed on the night I was thrown out and had nowhere to go. Margaret's eyes glistened. Your mother would be proud. I know. Caroline set down the photograph. And so would my father in his own way. He gave me power. Now I'm going to use it for something real. She straightened her shoulders. Set up a meeting with the board. I want to announce the foundation at the annual gala next month. Consider it done. Margaret turned to leave, then paused at the door. Caroline. Yes. For what it's worth. I think you've become exactly who you were meant to be. Caroline smiled. For the first time in months, it reached her eyes. I think so too. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel hummed with the electric energy of Seattle's elite. Caroline stood on the private balcony, the glass doors sealed behind her, muting the applause that thundered inside. The night air carried the salt tang of the Puget Sound. For the first time in her life, the cold didn't bother her. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that draped over her frame like armor. Her posture was straight. Her chin held high. A year ago, she had been down there shivering on a curb with $500 stuffed in her bra and a broken heart. Tonight, she owned the skyline. The heavy glass door slid open with a whisper. Margaret stepped out holding a tablet in one hand and 2 glasses of sparkling water in the other. The donations are record-breaking tonight. Margaret said, her voice carrying a rare note of pride. The Second Chance Initiative for Displaced Mothers has been fully funded for the next decade. We've raised enough to build 3 new shelters before winter. Caroline took the glass Margaret offered. The bubbles were sharp against her tongue. That's good. No woman should have to stand in the rain wondering where she'll sleep. No child should spend their first night on Earth in a bus station. You've turned your pain into a fortress for others. Margaret stepped up beside her. Your father built an empire of wealth. You're building an empire of hope. Hope is harder, Caroline said quietly. Money is just numbers. Hope requires faith that people can change, that circumstances can improve, that the world isn't as cruel as it sometimes feels. Do you believe that? Caroline thought about the question. Really thought about it. I believe people can survive anything if they have one person who believes in them. I had you. I had my mother's memory. I had Jamie to fight for. She turned to Margaret. Most women in my situation have no one. That's what the foundation is for. To be that one person. Margaret's eyes glistened. Your mother would be proud. I know. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle below. "We have the final report on Derek," Margaret said eventually, her tone shifting to pure business. Caroline's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And he's still in Ohio, working at the warehouse, living above the laundromat, no social media, no contact with anyone from his former life." Margaret pulled up a file on her tablet. "He clocks in at 4 a.m. every day, takes the bus home, eats alone, sleeps alone, repeats. Any sign he's trying to contact Jamie lawyers? Private investigators? Nothing. He's completely given up. The man you married doesn't exist anymore. He's been replaced by a shadow." Caroline absorbed this information without expression. "Good. There's something else." Margaret hesitated. "Something you should know." "What?" "Brittany Collins reached out to our legal team last week. She wanted to know if she could visit you. She says she has information about Derek, something she didn't share before." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "What kind of information?" "She wouldn't say, only that it's important, that it changes everything." "Changes everything how?" "I don't know. She was cryptic. Scared, maybe." Margaret met Caroline's gaze. "Do you want me to arrange a meeting?" Caroline considered it. Brittany had been useful once, providing the embezzlement evidence that had helped destroy Derek's career. But she had also been the woman wearing Caroline's robe, looking at her with pity and disgust while she begged for shelter. Trust was not something Caroline gave easily anymore. "Tomorrow," she finally said. "Bring her to my office. But have security nearby. I don't want any surprises." "Understood." The next morning, Brittany Collins walked into Caroline's office, looking nothing like the confident young woman who had once stolen her husband. She was thinner, paler. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple sweater and jeans that looked like they'd been washed too many times. "Thank you for seeing me," Brittany said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it." "You're right, you don't." Caroline gestured to a chair. "Sit, talk. You have 5 minutes." Brittany sat on the edge of the seat, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. About what Derek did to you. About what I helped him do." She swallowed hard. "And I realized I never told you the whole truth." "About what?" "About Jamie." Caroline's blood turned to ice. "What about Jamie?" "The night Derek kicked you out. Before you came home from the hospital." Brittany's hands trembled. "Derek and I were talking. He was drunk. Celebrating. He said things." "What things?" "He said he knew Jamie wasn't his. He said he'd known for months, since the fertility clinic." Caroline stopped breathing. "What?" "He remembered the doctor's diagnosis. He just pretended not to. He went along with the pregnancy because he was already planning to leave you. He figured if you had a baby, you'd be too busy and exhausted to notice what he was doing with me. And when he was ready to go, he'd use the paternity question to destroy you in court." The words hit Caroline like physical blows. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew the whole time." "He played you, Caroline. Both of us. He let you think you were protecting his ego, when really he was just waiting for the right moment to weaponize the truth." Caroline's hands clenched into fists. Her carefully constructed narrative, the story of a woman who had sacrificed her own honesty to shield her husband's fragile pride, crumbled like sand. She hadn't been protecting Derek. She had been his pawn. "Why are you telling me this now?" Caroline demanded. "Why wait a year?" Brittany's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was scared. Because I thought if I told you, you'd find a way to hurt me too. But then I saw what you're doing with the foundation, the shelters, the women you're helping." She wiped her cheek. "I realized you're not the monster Derek made you out to be. You're someone who actually cares about people. And Derek is exactly what he always was. A user, a manipulator, a coward." Brittany's voice hardened. He used me to cheat on you. He used you to build his career. He used Jamie as a bargaining chip. And when everything fell apart, he blamed everyone but himself. She leaned forward. There's more. More? The medical records Derek waved around at his press conference. The ones he claimed proved he was sterile. He doctored them. Caroline frowned. What do you mean? The original report said his count was low but not impossible. He found someone to alter the numbers to make them look worse than they were. He wanted irrefutable proof so no one would question his claims. Why would he make himself look more infertile than he was? Because he was betting on you refusing to do a DNA test. He figured you'd rather let the world think you used a donor than prove Jamie was his. That way he could claim the baby was fake without ever having to prove it. Caroline's mind raced. But the TV interview. I told the world he was sterile. I said I used a donor. And he believed you. Because that's what he wanted to believe. It confirmed his theory. It let him play the victim. Brittany shook her head. He never actually checked Caroline. He never demanded a paternity test because he was afraid of what it might show. Which was, Brittany met her eyes. That Jamie is his biological son. That despite everything against all odds you conceived naturally. That he threw away his own flesh and blood because his ego couldn't handle the possibility that he might be less than perfect. The silence in the office was absolute. Caroline sat motionless, processing the revelation. Jamie was Derek's son. Biologically, legally, undeniably his son. The sperm donor story had been a lie she had told to protect herself and punish Derek. But Derek had been lying too. He had known about his fertility issues. He had manipulated the situation from the beginning. He had planned to use Jamie against her long before he threw them into the rain. And now he was living in Ohio, believing with absolute certainty that he had no genetic connection to the child he had abandoned. He believed it because she had told him so on national television. He believed a lie about a lie. Why should I believe you? Caroline finally asked. You lied before. You helped Derek destroy my life. Why should I trust anything you say? Brittany reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Because I have the original medical records. The real ones, before Derek had them altered. She placed the folder on the desk. And I have emails between Derek and the technician he bribed to change them. It's all documented. Caroline opened the folder. The evidence was undeniable. Derek's actual sperm count was low but viable. The altered version showed numbers that were essentially zero. He had manufactured his own sterility. What do you want from me, Brittany? Why bring this to me now? Brittany stood up. Her expression was tired, but resolute. I don't want anything. I'm not asking for money or forgiveness or a job. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. She moved toward the door. What you do with it is up to you. She paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Caroline. I'm sorry. For everything. I was young and stupid, and I let a charming man convince me that I was special. By the time I realized what he really was, it was too late. She opened the door. I hope Jamie grows up knowing he has a mother who would burn down the world to protect him. That's more than most kids get. She walked out. Caroline sat alone with the folder, her mind churning. The truth was more complicated than she had ever imagined. Derek had manipulated everyone, her Brittany, the courts, the media. He had constructed an elaborate web of lies designed to serve his interests at every turn. And she had responded with lies of her own. The difference was her lies had been told in desperation, in self-defense, to protect her son from a father who saw him as nothing more than leverage. Derek's lies had been told in cold calculation, to hurt, to control, to destroy. But now she held the real truth in her hands. The truth that could shatter Derek's last remaining delusion. The truth that could prove Jamie was his biological son. The question was, what did she want to do with it? She could go public, hold another press conference, expose Derek's manipulation for all the world to see, prove that she hadn't used a donor after all. that Jamie was a Harrison by blood. But what would that accomplish? Derek was already destroyed, living in exile, working for minimum wage, forgotten by everyone who had once admired him. Proving Jamie's paternity wouldn't hurt him more, it might actually give him hope, a reason to fight for visitation rights, a legal avenue back into her life. Or she could do nothing. Let Derek continue believing the lie she had told. Let him live out his days convinced that Jamie was a stranger's child. Let the false narrative she had constructed remain the official truth. It would mean living with a lie, building Jamie's entire identity on a foundation of deception. But it would also mean peace, safety, the absolute certainty that Derek would never return. Caroline closed the folder. She picked up her phone and dialed Margaret. The meeting with Brittany. What happened? She gave me some documents, evidence that Derek manipulated his medical records. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves he knew about his fertility issues all along. The kind that proves he was planning to use Jamie against me from the beginning. Margaret was silent for a moment. What are you going to do? Caroline looked out the window at the city below. At the empire she had built. At the future she had created for herself and her son. Nothing. Nothing. Derek is gone. He believes what I told him. He's living in Ohio, convinced he has no biological connection to Jamie. If I reveal the truth, he might try to come back. He might claim parental rights. He might spend the next 18 years trying to worm his way back into our lives. But it's the truth, Caroline. The truth is what we decide it is. Caroline's voice was hard as steel. Derek wanted to erase Jamie from his life. He threw his own son into a rainstorm and called him a burden. So I gave him what he wanted. I erased him from Jamie's life instead. She paused. The truth would only give him a weapon, and I'm done arming my enemies. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Your father would have made the same choice. I know. But Caroline, someday Jamie will ask about his father. What will you tell him? Caroline closed her eyes. She thought about all the lies, all the truths, all the tangled threads of deception and survival that had brought her to this moment. I'll tell him his father wasn't ready to be a parent, that some people can't love anyone more than they love themselves, that it wasn't his fault. Is that enough? It's going to have to be. The gala that night was the most successful in Seattle's philanthropic history. Caroline stood at the podium looking out at a sea of faces. Donors, activists, politicians, media, all gathered to celebrate the launch of the Hartley Foundation. Jamie was in the VIP suite upstairs, being watched by a nanny Caroline had vetted more thoroughly than most CEOs vet their boards. He was 1 year old now, walking, babbling, laughing at everything with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who had never known fear. Caroline intended to keep it that way. 1 year ago, she began, her voice carrying across the ballroom. I stood in a rainstorm with a 2-day-old baby in my arms and $500 to my name. I had nowhere to go, no one to call, no hope. The room was silent. I was lucky. I had resources I didn't know about, people who stepped in to help me when I needed it most. But most women in my situation aren't lucky. They don't have secret billionaire fathers or executive lawyers waiting in the wings. They have nothing but their own strength and the desperate hope that tomorrow will be better than today. She gripped the podium. The Hartley Foundation exists for those women, the ones who are standing in the rain right now wondering how they'll survive the night, the ones who have been told they're worthless, that they deserve their suffering, that no one will ever help them. Her voice strengthened. We will help them. We will build shelters where they can be safe. We will provide lawyers to fight for their rights. We will offer job training so they can build new lives. And we will do it without judgment, without conditions, without asking them to prove their worthiness. She looked out at the crowd. Because every woman deserves a second chance. Every mother deserves the opportunity to protect her children. And no one should be thrown away like garbage because someone else decided they weren't valuable enough to keep. The applause was thunderous. Later, after the speeches and the champagne and the endless handshakes, Caroline returned to her private balcony. The city spread out below her, a constellation of lights against the darkness. Margaret joined her, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "The foundation raised $12 million tonight," she said. "That's more than we projected for the entire first year." "Good. Put it to work. Every dollar, every cent. I want women walking into those shelters by Christmas." "They will be." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the night. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" Margaret asked quietly. "If William had contacted you earlier, if Derek had been a different man, if you'd never had to go through any of this?" Caroline considered the question. "No, because this is who I am now. The pain, the betrayal, the rain, it all made me stronger. It gave me purpose." She turned to Margaret. "I wouldn't trade that for an easier life. Not anymore." "And Derek? Derek is exactly where he deserves to be. Living with the consequences of his choices. Knowing that he threw away everything that mattered for the illusion of something better." Caroline's voice hardened. He wanted a partner who fit his image of success. Well, now he has nothing. And I have everything. Including the truth. Including the truth. Caroline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The truth that Jamie is his biological son. The truth that he threw away his own flesh and blood. The truth that he'll never know because knowing would only give him hope. She turned back to the city. Some doors once closed should never be opened again. Some truths should stay buried. And some men should live out their days knowing they destroyed the best thing that ever happened to them. Margaret nodded slowly. "What about Jamie? When he's older?" "When he's older, he'll know the facts. That his biological father was a man who wasn't capable of love. That I chose to raise him alone because it was safer than the alternative. That blood doesn't make a family, choices do." She paused. "And he'll know that his mother walked through fire to give him a life worth living. That's the only legacy that matters." Margaret raised her glass. "To legacies." Caroline clinked her glass against Margaret's. "To legacies." Across the country, in a dingy apartment above a laundromat in Ohio, Derek Harrison sat alone in the darkness. The television was off. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the neon sign of the dry cleaner across the street, casting red and blue shadows across the walls. He was holding a photograph. It was the only one he had kept. The only one he hadn't been able to throw away. A picture of Caroline from their wedding day. Young. Happy. Looking at him like he was the center of her universe. He had been the center of her universe once. He had thrown it all away. For what? For Brittany, who had abandoned him the moment his money ran out. For a promotion that never came. For an image of success that had always been a mirage. He thought about Jamie. The son he had never wanted. The burden he had thrown into the rain. Caroline had told the world that Jamie wasn't his, that he was sterile, that she had used a donor. Part of him had believed it immediately. It explained everything. His inability to accept his own inadequacy. His certainty that something must have been wrong. But another part of him, a small, quiet part, that he tried to silence, wondered if she had been telling the truth. What if Jamie was his son? What if he had abandoned his own child? What if he had thrown away the only family he would ever have? The thought was unbearable. So he buried it, pushed it down, refused to examine it. It was easier to believe Caroline's story. Easier to accept that Jamie was a stranger's child. Easier to convince himself that he had lost nothing of real value. Easier to live with the lie than to face the possibility of the truth. Derek set down the photograph and picked up a bottle of cheap whiskey. He drank until the questions faded. He drank until the memories blurred. He drank until he could pretend for a few hours at least that he had never been the man who threw his family into the rain. And in Seattle, 1,000 miles away, Caroline tucked her son into bed and kissed his forehead. "Good night, Jamie," she whispered. "Mommy loves you. Loves." Jamie gurgled happily, already half asleep, unaware of the wars that had been fought for his sake. Caroline stood in the doorway watching him drift off. She thought about Derek alone in his exile. She thought about the truth she had buried. She thought about the life she had built from the ashes of the one that had burned. And she felt no guilt. Derek had wanted to erase Jamie from his existence. She had simply granted his wish. Some men create their own prisons. Derek had built his from arrogance, cruelty, and the certainty that he deserved better than the woman who had loved him. Now he would spend the rest of his life locked inside those walls, never knowing that the key to his freedom, the truth about his son, was something Caroline would never give him. She closed the nursery door softly. She walked back to the balcony, where the city lights sparkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. She had been broken once, thrown away like garbage, left to die in a storm with nothing but her baby and her rage. But she had risen. She had built an empire. She had protected her son, and she had buried the man who tried to destroy her so deep that he would never find his way back to the surface. Caroline Hartley lifted her face to the night sky and smiled. The storm was over, and she had won.